I would want my colleagues and the American people to know really where we stand financially. The war on terror will not defeat us. We will defeat ourselves. Every known republic to the world collapsed through fiscal mismanagement. You can go back and read the history. Alexander Tyler, on the Athenian Empire, several other scholarly works throughout the last 2 to 3 centuries. But what we're really talking about is our kids. And not my kids. My kids are grown. They're all in their 30s or 40s or 30s. But we're talking about youngsters this age. And she makes a great point. She's already $38,375 in debt, and all she owns is a dollhouse. It's true. The sad thing is she totally underestimates, because her obligation for things we have promised ourselves, for which she will have to pay above and beyond income tax rates that we have today, Social Security taxes and Medicare taxes that we have today, is just a mere $400,000. So that by the time she becomes 20, she will owe $800,000 if you count the interest on that, which is coming. You know, it's not long till we're going to be spending $1 trillion a year on interest. $800,000, and this number by that time will be $118,000. So now we'll have her at $918,000 that she's going to have to pay off for us. Think about that as a moral question. Should we, in fact, cut the legs off of our grandchildren so the politicians and political leaders today can spin things and avoid making the most difficult choices that we now need to make? If you follow the news, especially the financial news, the problem the United States faces today is the fact that the dollar is losing confidence in the world. And there's a reason for it. What's the reason? The world is starting to sense that as we continue to borrow more and more in billions and trillions of dollars, that in fact we won't be able to pay it back. Therefore, the world's valuation of our currency becomes less confident. Therefore, the cost to borrow in the future becomes higher, which compound these figures that I just quoted, the $918,000 per child that's born over the next 30 years in this country is based on today's interest rates of a 3.4% 10-year note that the government offers. What happens when the interest rates are 10 or 11%? You're talking about a fiscal collapse that has never before been seen in the history of the world. And yet we continue to put spending bills on the floor and laud the fact that we're only borrowing 43 cents out of every dollar this year. It will come a time when we can't borrow 43 cents out of every dollar we spend. What will we do then? What will happen then? What will happen is the following. You will either see a totally debased currency, which means everything you worked for your entire life will be markedly decreased in its value, or you will see 15, 20, 30% inflation. There is no other exit for this other than for us to do the following. Us to start making the hard choices now. This bill doesn't do it. Just think for a minute. From 2008 to 2009, fiscal year ended September 30th, we increased Commerce Justice State by 15.5%. This bill comes back and increases it another 12.6%. We'll just compound that out 4 years, and what you'll find, without the stimulus money that they also got, you will find that in this agency, you will see that we will double the size of this agency in less than 4 years. I'm not sure that's what we want as a country. Here's what we've done so far. And I'd note you to the bottom of this, bottom corner. Inflation is expected to be less than 1.6%. And yet you see 5.7, 7.2, energy and water, 1.4. And the only reason it was 1.4 is because they got $45 billion from the stimulus. Agriculture, 12.6. Treasury HUD, 22.5. Interior, 16.2. And now CJS, 12.6. I would put forward that most families in this country, and I know almost every business is making hard choices right now about what they spend money on and what they don't. They're in tough times. Somehow, that hadn't reverberated to this body. And if it has, it hadn't reverberated to the Appropriations Committee in the House or the Senate. And so we put forward, there will be an amendment put forward to freeze the spending at last year's level, which could easily be done, but we don't have the courage to do that. And there'll be several other amendments that are going to be offered, and they're working on a unanimous consent agreement at this time. I'm going to be offering 3 amendments, and I will wait till the senator from Maryland comes before I offer them. And I understand they don't want me to call them up at this time, and so I won't. But one of the amendments limits some funding to the National Science Foundation. And it's created quite an uproar with the political scientists in this country, that we would dare decrease the amount of money that we spend on figuring out why politicians are vague or why certain people vote a certain way or the other way. What happens when we spend money on obvious answers is that money for the National Science Foundation doesn't go to cure a disease, doesn't go to make an absolute impact in some child who's suffering from a chronic disease that unless the research dollars are put there, they'll never have a normal lifestyle or life. But in fact, everybody screams when some of their money gets attacked. So the political scientists in the country, those that get this money, $91.3 million over the last 10 years that we've doled out to political scientists, that $91 million could have gone to the study of biology or chemistry or pharmaceutical science or fields of endeavor like micronutrients or cellular metabolism or genetic manipulation so we can cure a disease. But instead, where do they spend the money? Campaigns and election, electoral choice and systems, political change, domestic conflict, party activism, political psychology, and political tolerance. What are some of the good things NSF does? Let me give you a list. NSF scientists have developed new computer-generated robotics that help people with severe disabilities, to where they can do what we can do, those of us that don't have a physical disability, except they can now do it with a robot. They become independent again. They get their life back. NSF supported engineers that created a bone substitute that blends into tendon tissues, which mimics natural bone and provides better integration so that people with lost movement in their joints get it returned. NSF created technology with their grants to engineer the next generation of biofuels. We're seeing the science come from it. They created a new type of fiber reinforced concrete that bends without cracking. It's 300 to 500 times more resistant to cracking and 40% lighter in weight, which means we can build bridges that won't ever fall down. We won't have a Minnesota tragedy again. That's where the real science from the National Science Foundation. Now let me give you a little hint of what the National Science Foundation projects for political science have done. $188,206 to ask the question, why do political candidates make vague statements and what are the consequences? We all know the answer to that. They make vague statements because they want to get reelected, don't want to get pinned down. Not hard to figure out, but we blew a lot of money on it. How about a grant for political discussion in the workplace? That's got to be an important priority for the country now that we're running a $1.6 trillion deficit. Television news and the visual framing of war. I'm certain that is an important research topic that we should sacrifice our children's future for. And I know it must be a priority for her. This little girl whose daddy or mama was smart enough to recognize what the real consequences of our behavior is. Or how about another study? Why people are for or against military conflicts. Nobody's for military conflicts. They're for defense of our country. But to spend money to study why people are for or against, tell me what that contributes to her future. You know, I'm accused of being a flatlander. I do come from Oklahoma. I was born in Wyoming, but you know, there's one difference between us flatlanders. Is we actually have worked in our lives, we understand common sense, and we've had to make hard choices before. How about a study, the impact of Medicare reform on senior citizens' political views? I can tell you what it is. You take away a benefit, they're not going to like it. You add a benefit, they're going to like it. Send me the check. I'll do it for free. It's plain old common sense. It may be nice to have the statistics behind that, but we all know the answer to those questions. Here's another one. Evaluate whip counts. Let me tell you what a whip count is. Every party has a whip, so they can count the votes before they happen, so they think they know what's going to happen on the vote, so they know what votes to bring up and what votes not to. And we're going to have a study by Congress to impact how do the whip counts impact party leaders in the legislative process. Who cares? Nobody should care about that. What we should care about is her future. We have our priorities totally upside down and turned on her ear. How about a conference on the effect of YouTube on the 2008 election? Now, the people that are interested in that are politicians. Because how do we use YouTube to get reelected? Should you be paying for that with your tax dollars? How do we keep incumbents incumbents? I would think is a better study of political science is how do you throw us all out? That's a better use of the funds. How do you get rid of us since we're doing such a terrible job of managing the finances of this country? Or how about the NewsHour with Jim Lehrer to pay for complete lifetime prime gavel-to-gavel coverage of the Democratic and GOP national conventions? Guess what? They were covered by 3 other networks. Free. We didn't pay them a penny. Yet we paid this. We're going to increase NSF's budget in this bill 8%, the National Science Foundation. It's the one we ought to be increasing 12 or 15%. But it ought to be on real science, on pure science, on science that has an outcome that we can measure, that is not related to observation of common fact, but is new research that will derive great benefits for the people of this country. So I'll be offering an amendment to limit the amount of money. We're going to hear all sorts of claims. What we've heard already on the blogs is that National Science Foundation political science research contributes to our understanding of democracy. I think we've pretty well figured what democracy is. Our ability to have a free and open democratic process would be significantly harmed without this research. You know what's being harmed? It's her generation. As we foolishly spend dollar after dollar on things that are not a priority. Hundreds of millions of dollars on program after program after program that 90% of America could say, that might be fine if we were in the, in a cash-rich position. But at a time when the federal government's about to double every 4 years and the debt's about to double every 5, wouldn't it be smart to not spend money that we don't have on things we don't need? And so that's what this amendment is. There's another claim. The loss of National Science Foundation funding will significantly harm political science research in this country. Well, let me give you a few facts about that. The University of Michigan, they're the receiver of the largest grant under the NSF, has a $7.5 billion endowment. That's just one of the universities. $7.5 billion, and we're supposed to keep sending every 10 years $100 million for political science research. Here's the political science. Here it is. The heritage of this nation is that one generation creates opportunity for the next by sacrificing, making the hard choices they need to make sure what has worked in the past will provide them opportunities in the future. This doesn't do any of that. What it does is the ones that are on the ends, the people that are well connected now, the people that are dependent on millions of dollars of funding, when they're sitting with billions of dollars in their endowments and saying they're worth more than she is. That's exactly the problem. Until we figure out, we're going to have to make some tough sacrifices. Her future is at risk. And unless we do this fairly soon, we could very well be on an irreversible course. 2 or 3 more years of spending the way we're spending and borrowing the way we're borrowing will doom her to a standard of living 40% below what we see today. Those aren't my words. The economists agree. The governments are going to end up consuming 45 or 50% of our total GDP. We're at 10% this year, the highest in our history, with the exception of the midst of World War II. Never have we been in such shape as we are in today. Mr. President, I think we got a lot of things wrong. But the number one thing that we have wrong is we've forgotten that service is about sacrifice. Service is about giving up something of you so somebody else gets ahead. And we can't expect the American people to model that behavior if we're not willing to do it. If everything we do is about protecting our own vested political interests and protecting our campaign contributors and protecting the well-connected and not excluding and divorcing ourselves from all of that and making great common sense judgments, we're history as a nation. I wonder when it started. I wonder when it started that we decided we were more important than the country. I wonder when it started when we decided we would push our hand and say, stop the heritage of this country. When did it start that we decided we were worth more than the generations that follow us? When did it start that we decided that we weren't brave enough to take the hits to make the hard choices so the republic can be preserved? When did it start? When did that cowardice start? Because it's ever present now as we go through the appropriation process. I ran a business for 9 years, and I learned a lot doing that. I learned a lot about people, but I also learned a lot about making tough choices. And you, in fact, can make tough choices and preserve what's good and best and brightest in all of us. Matter of fact, hope comes from that when people make those tough decisions that, in fact, consider the very personal nature of how individuals are affected, be it work for a common good for the long run. You see, there's not a business out there today that's surviving that's thinking only in the short run. If they are, they won't be here 2 years from now. They're all thinking in the long run. They're all positioning, planning, managing, developing. Same with families. They're doing that right now at the dinner table. Positioning, planning, developing what's going to come next. How are we going to get where we want to go? We're in a rough period now. What do we cut back? What is the things that we sacrifice today to secure the future for our family tomorrow? Ashamedly, not much of that exists in Washington. What does exist is a willingness to say yes to everybody and then wink and nod and try to have it both ways. I'm not a both ways kind of guy. And neither is America. The great sheet is about to be lifted over the, I would use imbecilic methods of Washington. And when transparency gets its full view, America's going to make some major changes. And I'm not talking Republican, Democrat. I'm talking both. This is a problem of elitism. This is a problem of short-term thinking on the political leaders of this country on how do I manage my political career, and to heck with the rest of the country. Nobody in their right mind would bring appropriation bills to the floor that have these type of increases in a time when we're stealing $1.4 trillion from our grandkids. How do you justify it? How do you justify growing the federal government at a time when families are struggling like they've never struggled except during World War II and the Great Depression? How do you justify that? You don't justify it. You can't justify it. What you can do and what will happen in the debate on the amendments that I bring forward, they'll be ignored. They just won't debate it. It'll go away. That's what happens when we bring critical amendments to the floor and question the wisdom of growing the federal government larger and larger without developing a way to pay for it. And without taking a critical look at all of those programs out there, $350 billion worth of waste, fraud, and duplication that's in the federal government right now. The American people ought to be clamoring that we freeze spending everywhere until we've done a review of every government program that's out there, just like they're doing with their own families, just like they're doing with their own businesses, just like every organization in America today is having to do except governments. How is it that this can happen? How is it that we can go down the sewer drain just like other republics, knowing what history says will happen to us if, in fact, we abandon fiscal sanity? And that's what this appropriation bill does, and all the rest of them that we've passed. Because, in fact, we will double the size of the federal government in the next 4 years, based on 2008, 2009, not counting the stimulus. And if we're running a 1.4 trillion, actually 1.8 when you count everything we've stolen from Social Security and everything we've stolen from like the Inland Waterway Trust Fund and the other trust funds, and we haven't funded any federal pensions, and by the way, we haven't funded anything else that we have on obligation for, like VA health care or military retirement. None of those things are funded. What happens when we get in the crunch? What happens when nobody loans to us anymore? Wouldn't it be prudent to prepare for that? Wouldn't it be prudent for us to dig in as a nation, Democrats, Republicans, and Independents, and say, time out, let's look where we are, let's quit wasting $350 billion a year, let's eliminate the duplication. You know, there's 800 programs outside the Department of Education that are run by the federal government for education. Outside the Department of Education. How about eliminating them? Or at least putting them in the Department of Education and consolidating them? And oh, by the way, education's done a wonderful job at the federal government level. As soon as the federal government got into our educational system, our scores started declining, our graduation rates started declining, and our college graduation rates started declining. That's the record of the federal government's involvement in education in this country. There's a lot we can fix. Not just my ideas. The question I'm asking is, why aren't we asking the question? Why aren't the American people challenging their elected members to the Senate and the House? Where is your priority? Does she not matter? Does her future not matter? Answer the question. With $918,000 worth of unfunded liability and debt, for which at 20 years of age she will be paying, we will be paying the interest, which means the taxes for that interest will come back to her eventually. How will she get a college education? How will she own a home besides a dollhouse? How will it happen? Will Tinkerbell just come down and give it to her? That ain't going to happen. So as we think out years, we ought to be thinking about what our actions today are going to cause. And yet we don't. It's disturbing times. It's not just disturbing times because we face a war on terror. And it's not disturbing times because we have an economic downturn. What the disturbing times are is that we absolutely have a void of leadership in bringing this country back to its common sense basics of spending money that you have for things that are an ultimate priority, not spending money you don't have on things that we don't need. And these appropriation bills that I put up, a large portion of all of them are spending money we don't have on things we don't need. We may want them. There's no question politicians want them. There's no question like the National Science Foundation political science grantees want them. Do we need them? That's the question. And we have no leadership that will discern out at a time now in a crucial juncture in our history where we will have leadership that will take us in a path that will bring us to not only a recovery from this recession, but a recovery for an opportunity for every child her age. It's deeply personal with me. I have 5 grandchildren, and I look in their eyes and I see the potential of their their lives and all these other children that are out there. There's tremendous potential that is in them. And you know what? We're going to waterboard them. That's what we're going to do. We're going to waterboard them. We're going to flood them with debt. We're going to shackle their opportunities. We're going to limit their possibilities because we don't have the courage to make the difference for the future. Mr. President, I will yield the floor, and I will come back and offer my amendments when the senator from Maryland arrives. And with that, I'd note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.